I talked about there's a lot of causes, and I didn't really talk about this picture too much, but I thought I'd bring it in a little bit because why do I have pills here? These are antibiotics. Antibiotics can kill out bacteria. Some bacteria can the bacteria that grow in your gut. Some of them can be helpful and promote health, and some of them can actually cause you to store more weight and be unhealthy. This whole study of the body's bacteria is really interesting. Some studies show that early intake of antibiotics may increase risk for obesity in kids. Just a thought, just want to kind of throw it out there. It's like this is a survey course, so I get to say stuff like this without getting in as much detail as I should. Here's a kid watching TV. We know about that. This is such a sedentary behavior, and not only that, but they're being advertised too. So I'm going to show a couple of videos today about this whole advertising thing, but the world market goes after these guys, especially the United States, and a lot of countries, they don't allow marketing to kids, but we do in the United States. So little kids can be watching something and be marketed to. And then obviously there's our whole diet. So we talked about the socio-ecological model and how there are, different factors that affect how much we eat and how active we are. And there's more factors than that. There's factors that, our bodies are different. We have individual factors like genetics. So for some people, eating more causes them to gain more weight than for other people. So we're genetically different too. And then there's all these other influences, policies, cost of food, cost of unhealthy food, what food do your kids get, and so on and so on. Okay, so we left off here, and I mentioned the bacteria just a minute ago, but the microbiome is, we talk about it frequently in our nutrition courses, and it has to do with the organisms that populate our body, and these can affect many aspects of health, including our immune system, our how much we store fat, how quickly we burn through carbohydrates, how well we respond to challenges in the environment. It's such an interesting field of study. If you feel any interest in becoming a researcher, this will be a hot topic for a long time. So how does our gut microbiome, how does life affect it? Well, how kids are born. If kids are born vaginally versus surgical delivery, they have different, their guts are populated with seeded with different microbes right off. Okay, and then their antibiotics exposure, which I already talked about. And then if they're fed breast milk, then the breast milk actually has live bacteria that are probiotics, which means they are good, positive bacteria. And also we've talked about the composition of breast milk, where the human milk can affect the growth of bacteria. And so that all affects the infant and affects their microbiota, and that can affect the risk for overweight. So there's some evidence. It's not super strong, and not everybody can choose their birth mode because of emergencies, but natural birth provides more healthful bacteria. They're more likely to get moms versus the doctor or nurse. Not having antibiotics are good, and then being breastfed. These things can be helpful. They're not the answer, but they are a factor in risk for obesity. Excuse me. Another factor has to do with portion size, and you've probably seen these things so many times, but I always do it. Everything's bigger now. When I was a little kid, our portions were small. I remember going in, and my mother, I'm pretty sure she gave me SpaghettiOs for lunch sometimes. There's a little bowl. So I'd come in for lunch, and she'd give me this little bowl of SpaghettiOs, and then I'd go out and play for 3 or 4 more hours. We don't do this now, right? We've gone from here's a piece of bread to here's a monstrous bagel. And bagels now, a lot of them are 500 calories. So we were used to smaller portions, and now we're used to larger portions. And without thinking about it, we may be more likely to serve these larger portions to kids. And the environment, surely when people buy fast food, the portion sizes for kids have way too many calories, too much salt, too much fat, too many calories. They're not real food. So some comments about this from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Here's how serious this is. And this is sort of a emotional look at this, but I'll never forget the afternoon I asked one of my patients, a 17-year-old high school student, what he was going to do after graduation. He had good grades and a great personality. He's also been struggling with obesity since he was a toddler and now is being treated for hypertension. In answer to my question, he burst into tears. I always wanted to be a state trooper, but I'm afraid I won't pass the physical. At that moment, I realized that we were not only fighting for his good health, we're struggling for his future. And that's what's so serious about this. You can plug in what somebody wants to do and how their body weight might affect their capacity to be hired. And you realize that children that suffer from child obesity, their options are much narrower, including the risk for early death and all those things. So despite nearly 3 decades of awareness, the epidemic continues to grow. We thought that the obesity rate was stabilized for 2 to 5-year-olds, but we're still worried. Now young children have type 2 diabetes, liver disease, hypertension, sleep apnea, can't sleep, that affects their ability to work in school, and the rates are high. So slowly, the obesity epidemic is woven into the culture of our entire country and affects the entire life trajectory of kids affected by it. It doesn't mean people that are obese can't have success, can't be happy, can't do anything. I certainly don't mean to imply that. What I mean is it's harder. They are more faced with medical costs. They're less likely to be hired for specific jobs. So it's harder. So it behooves us to protect children to the extent that we can, so that obesity is not their final destiny. So what do we do then? So, you know, you guys know this. I imagine all of you could design a really good diet. The same diet you would design for adults, you would design for kids. You just have smaller portions, lots of produce, you know, keep kids physically active, eat vegetables and fruit, and, you know, don't overdo protein, and they can get dairy, but not too much. And you know, just go by the My Plate. And what doesn't fit on here is all the things in the American diet that are in most convenience stores. All the bags of pretzels and produce and this and this and this, not produce, sorry, pretzels and just chips and items that are just highly processed, salty, fatty foods. Those items, or sweet, those items break this whole mess up. They can affect satiety, affect their intake of other things. And this is so ingrained into what we do sometimes. One of the things I used to think about was how, when I was a kid, we would go on a trip, like to drive all day somewhere and see relatives. And we would stop and eat lunch at around noon. Let's say it's a 12-hour, 10-hour drive. It was actually hideous. But so we'd stop and eat lunch. My parents would make, you know, a white bread, American cheese sandwich, you know, and an apple or something like that. And then when we get there, 4 or 5 hours later, we have dinner. What do people do now when they go in the car? Oftentimes they get, you know, even during the height of COVID, I saw the lines for Starbucks going all the way around everywhere. So we get big cups, we get junk food to eat in the car. A treat to get kids across the state on a drive is, here's a bunch of produce. I mean, not produce, here's a bunch of processed foods. Here's your chips, here's your candy, here's this. So we've normalized eating when we're not hungry for pleasure. That's something we can get away from, but it's a norm. So how do we help Texas children's nutrition? There's I don't know if you've heard of this, but there's a program called Go Slow and Whoa that a lot of schools have adopted. And what they do is they label foods color code, right? So whoa is a red foods, go are the green foods, and slow is yellow, just like the traffic light diet, right? And so we teach kids the go foods, eat as much as you want, slow foods, eat some, and whoa foods, have every now and then. And so this type of messaging is simple and seems to work not only for children, but also for adults. Make sure they've got a healthy breakfast at school, because that'll stop them from overeating during the day often. And then also there are programs for schools. Catch is one of them that have provided infrastructure to train the cafeteria staff, make sure that the foods provided are healthful, and provide messaging and education for the kids across the board. Those coordinated programs have changed the rate of child obesity in schools. So there is hope. And there are other programs like this for kids in child care centers. We can make a difference. I have worked and published on working with child care centers on changing their menus to remove the junk food and have more whole foods and change their diet. And people will do it. They need instruction and they need to know how to do it, and it has to be cost neutral, but it's doable. Also, get rid of soda. There's no room for it. So some more sort of emotional comments. It's not just a problem affecting individuals, but families or communities. Our entire future is in jeopardy. I don't think this is an overstatement. If the health of our nation is so compromised that we're sick all the time, how can we be productive and have a better life? COVID is a perfect example of this. People that are overweight or obese are at much greater risk for developing complications and dying from COVID. And it makes me so sad. But if we could change this trajectory where we're healthier, prevention is involved, we can make a difference. So we all have a stake. If you have anything in you to work to be an advocate, do it. When you're a parent, work in the school system. If you've got kids in a child care center, figure out how to work with a child care center to make sure the policies and foods provided are helpful. Take a step up all the time. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. I've done it. I've gotten people annoyed at me, and yet I've been able to make change. Our Child Development Center at Texas State University now doesn't have slushies. They were offering slushies for a while and stuff like that, which was mainly chemical stuff. So I was able to stop them by being annoying, but trying to be kind and talking about the importance of it. I was able to change policies there so the foods are more healthful. Y'all can do this as educated people. Okay, so what do? In early years, support breastfeeding. We know all these things help. Responsive feeding, meaning listen to your child. Authoritative parenting, which means provide limits, but also be respectful. It's a lot like responsive feeding. Make sure kids learn they have to try healthful foods. All these things help. Build parenting skills and increase access to healthy foods. We have lots of resources. You may not know this, but brand new legislation now is giving more money to WIC for produce for new moms. It just happened. So this is so exciting, right? So the world is changing right now with legislation. In schools, make healthy schools a norm where food is not, there's no entitlement to junk food. Our entitlement should be to food that promotes our health and the functionality of kids. That's where we should be entitled, is to make the world a better place. And parents have, you would not believe how much power parents have. When parents complain, people listen. So all these things are expensive and they matter. Work in your community. One barrier in a lot of communities, and this is particularly in low communities of low socioeconomic status, is the lack of access to playgrounds and trails and things like that. These things should be prioritized, and sometimes they are. Businesses have money. You might be surprised how much money they have. You shouldn't be, because these are the guys that run the stock market, and these are the guys that influence your politicians. So businesses have a lot more money than you do. And if you, as a consumer, tell them, we need you to do something for the community, they will consider doing it. There's some businesses that actually have grants out for people, and they'll give grants to help families improve the community. Policies are always important. The one I mentioned about WIC is good. More and more produce for WIC families is good. And then finally, let's do prevention care instead of putting out fires when people are obese, trying to manage their diabetes, trying to turn them around. It's so much easier to prevent overweight than it is to decrease overweight. Prevention is so much easier, so much more fun, so cheap, so much cheaper. So prevention, and this is, you guys are all majors in a field that's dedicated to prevention. So you can change the world and your community and anywhere else by promoting these things. So that's the discussion on, sorry. That's the discussion on child obesity. Are there any questions about this? I'm totally open. Let me stop sharing. What happened? Did my screen stop? Good, because I just closed the file. So any comments about this? You got nothing? On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it that we prevent child obesity, where 1 is the most important and 10 we don't care?
11.
Wait, 10 we don't care, so 11 is
1.
Sorry, that just shows how tired I am. I'm sorry.
Oh, I would totally answer the same way. So I totally give. So it's critical, right? You guys agree it's critical?
Very critical.
You know, parents don't know enough too, and it's not their fault. It's so important. I think more than anything, never blame a parent, never blame a child. Be as kind as you can, but help empower people by teaching them what they can do, but not only, you know, a meal plan doesn't work that well when people don't know how to do it. And a lot of times, really successful programs often involve cooking classes and these one-on-one or community-based interventions. Those things can be really rewarding to work in. If you're in a community and you realize there's a problem, you can be a leader in this. And another thing you can do is there are nonprofits out there that work with kids. You could, when you are done with your education, at least for the first degree, you can talk to people, you can talk to nonprofits, figure out if you can help, right? So you can change the world. And as a parent, if you don't want to work for a group, as a parent, don't be quiet. You know, advocate for all the kids, even if your kid's fine, you're not worried about their weight, you still worry about their nutrient intake, right? So there's a way to make a difference. So thank you guys for caring about these things. So if no more questions, I'm going to start talking about pre-pregnancy. So this is your last call. Oh, no, I'm wrong. Sorry, I want to show a video. I got to do a screen share because it doesn't work otherwise. Okay, so I wanted to do this. You can see my, do you guys see this? This right here?
No, we don't see anything.
Yeah, okay, I didn't think that worked, okay. There you go. Okay, so this is your module on child obesity. So what you want to do here is take a look at it. As I told you before, I don't, pardon me? Okay, I don't put anything here unless I mean it. So so take a look. This will provide information that we may have kind of skipped over, but I want you to look at advertisements. And this is, okay, first, before I do that, when I have class on land, we watch HBO Weight of the Nation. This is so interesting. It doesn't take long to watch. And if you care about this stuff, it talks about the struggles that families face, how they found solutions. It's beautifully done, and how they're challenged by the food industry. It's such a good thing. So please, if you care at all, take time to read this. In fact, maybe we'll come up with our quiz around this. Kristen, let's do that. Let's make a quiz on watching HBO Weight of the Nation to encourage people to watch it and ask them questions. Okay, let's do that. That'll be your credit. Okay, so here's a couple of videos that kind of show what kids are faced with. Okay, what I like about that so much, isn't that a cool video? So you had a video assignment for your class. And what I like about that, it's such a nice way to show a point. So what they're showing is that, obviously if Honey Nut Cheerios has so much more sugar than Cheerios and we don't even think about it. So fantasize about the video you would have made if we were able to keep it. So let's try one more. I like this too. Everybody see this okay?
Pepsi announces
Yes.
it's selling sugary drinks in schools.
You hear a lot these days about how big food and beverage companies have our kids' best interests at heart.
Pepsi self, we are spreading goodness.
So why are they doing things like launching marketing campaigns disguised as charities right in our schools? The food industry says it cares about our kids.
When you choose Pepsi, you support the Pepsi Refresh Project.
But we're not buying it. There's a children's health crisis going on.
And alarming numbers of just even greater among African Americans and Latinos.
And experts agree, too much sugar, salt, and fat are at the heart of it. Food companies put sugar, salt, and fat into virtually everything they sell. They load it into fast foods and sodas, even the everyday products they claim will make our kids healthy. And then they bombard our kids with thousands of ads every year, almost all of them for unhealthy
The
foods.
American Academy of Pediatrics is calling for a ban on fast food television promotions during children's programming.
The food and beverage industry says it's up to us parents to make smart decisions. Then why are they spending $2 billion a year on characters like these?
Silly rabbit, tricks are for kids.
And misleading parents into thinking that food packed with unhealthy ingredients is good for our kids.
It says berry, but it's not berry loaded with fruit.
It has zero fruit. If you look at Zip, it turns out that 48% of the calories come from sugar. In fact, sugar is the primary ingredient in this product.
They even sneak their ads into our kids' favorite movies, their mobile phones and computer games. If they really have our kids' best interests at heart, why are these powerful junk food companies lobbying the White House and Congress to stop even voluntary guidelines? Why are they suing our local health departments?
The American Beverage Association is mounting a legal attack against cities from California to New York.
And why are they behind state laws that stop parents from deciding how to protect our kids right in our own communities? The food industry says it's trying to be part of the solution. But we're not buying it. Parents don't decide what to market and sell to kids. Food companies do. Let's stand up to big business and hold them accountable.
So let me unshare. There you go. Any comments about that? I think you hear about this in our policy classes and in here a little bit, but unless we regulate industry, then they market directly to kids. And this is old. You saw 2011, but it's still going on exactly like this. You guys play video games? You play online games? You ever see any advertisements anywhere? It depends on if you pay for it or not, right? You can play free games and it seems like, oh, this is free, but really you're being advertised to. You get on Facebook or other social media, you used to get advertised to all the time, right? So kids are advertised in children's programming all the time. And so they nag their parents, hey, I want this, I want this, I want this. And parents do what they can. Marketing is one of the biggest issues. There are countries that don't allow marketing to kids until they're 12 to 14 years old, but now we allow marketing to people when they're a fetus. So, any thoughts? We do. Any thoughts about this, or are you good?
I just was thinking about how a lot of, because it's like they've been marketing to kids for a couple of generations now, that I think a lot of parents think, like, what's the big deal? It's like part of being a kid to be, to like see these advertisements on TV and all these things, and to eat these cereals and everything. And yeah, it's kind of stuck now in our like popular culture, I think. And I think that makes it difficult to implement things that will change the way that we think about marketing to kids.
that's a pretty poignant statement. Anybody else want to talk about this? Is this your norm? Did you grow up with the norm where you were marketed to and it's just normal?
I have kind of a similar but different experience. I have celiac disease, so I grew up kind of never really being exposed to fast food. And then college was kind of the first time where I was like, well, it's a lot easier and I have other stuff to do. So I started eating more of it kind of my freshman year. And then I switched to nutrition. Now I'm like, wow, this is really shocking and horrifying.
Right? You know, the things that you guys learn in your curriculum here, I know a lot of it's pretty heavy in science, which makes you highly educated about this issue, but don't you wish there were basic nutrition education in schools, so in the high school years, so that people that would eventually become parents knew how much it mattered? I think your comment, Brianna, your comment about being normal is such a big deal. You know, people grow up and they go, well, I had candy, so candy's normal. You know, I'm not a naysayer about it. I had candy too. But man, the volume and the norm of eating candy and junk food now has changed so much, where it's not something you have dessert every now and then at home. Instead, you have a kind of a sugar infusion going. You have enough money to get it, and parents often pack this stuff in school meals in their lunch boxes because they know any better. They think they're being nice to their kid if they give them this and this, and a candy bar and a Kit Kat bar and this and this and this. And they don't understand, they don't know how serious it is. Why would they know? Like you said, they grew up with it. And your norm, Kate, your norm is to eat a certain way, and then you go to college and then the world changes. Also, the whole concept of autonomy, I remember this so well, even though it's been so long. When you're a kid, your parents are in charge. They jump off to college and oh my goodness, you get to make decisions about everything you eat. I can remember eating junk for, probably a year. I didn't have it so much as a kid, but now it's a norm for kids. A bag of M&Ms a day is a norm, right? And that's killing us. So it's killing them, it's killing their future. So it's not black and white where you can never have candy or desserts. But man, there should be treats. But parents don't have that education, so they need it. So you're the force of change, do it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the next lecture. This is on pre-pregnancy. Everybody see this okay? In the middle of the lecture, which is everybody see this? So it's preconception, nutrition, part 1. Y'all see it?
Yes.
Thank you so much. That helps a lot. Okay. So we've gone through the breastfeeding, infant nutrition of the kids, and we've gone through young children, and now we're going to jump into what about prior to pregnancy? Okay, so in a perfect world, we would have the most helpful body, the most helpful lifestyle practices, decide when we want to get pregnant, and have the number of kids we want to have, be able to support them, and on and on and on, right? Is the world perfect? It's not. In fact, half of pregnancies are unplanned, okay, in the United States. So that means we want to plan, the idea is to plan, but we don't always, pregnancies happen, life changes, whatever. But so there are major concerns about healthfulness of bodies if people aren't primed. So, for example, 31% of pregnant women are obese, and up to half are overweight or obese. So this means they were pregnant before conception. I mean, not pregnant, that's stupid. They're overweight before conception. So this matters because it affects the entire outcome of the pregnancy. This is new relative to a couple decades. Okay, a large majority don't take folic acid. You probably have heard that folic acid is important for development of the fetus, and we'll go into detail about this, but they're not taking it, okay? And then some number of people take medications that can cause birth defects. So these are primary health issues that can affect the outcome of pregnancy. This is by far the most predominant, although this one is very important. So the health of everyone is compromised if these issues are in place. Planning is important, as I said, in a perfect world. So we should have a reproductive plan, address health habits, social support, mental health before conception. The goal is to improve the health of everyone, and men's health also plays a role. So in a perfect world, this is what we wanted. I don't mean to sound like this is not achievable. It is. It's just we have some ways to go. So this involves education of people and the provision of resources so they have the knowledge and the access to food in order to do this right. So care, preconception care is critical. Okay, so what is this? Preconception care is medical care from a health professional that focuses on health related to having a healthy baby. The care should happen ideally at least 3 months before pregnancy. Some women who have access to well women's care have regular visits with a gynecologist or healthcare clinic. Many people do not have this regular access to clinics. In the state of Texas, we keep fighting about this, and because of concern for Planned Parenthood, the legislature wants to withdraw a bunch of clinics' capacity to help people with wellness prior to pregnancy. This has happened in the past, and what this means is all the women that don't have health care in Texas, the state of Texas has the highest number of uninsured people, first or second highest. So there's a lot of women out there that don't have access to health care or insurance. So don't have it. So it'd be nice if they had that so they could have reproductive care. And so they don't have it because we don't provide it, and we don't provide any assistance, and they don't make enough money to do it, and it's complicated. So this is a deficit. So women who receive care improve their folic acid intake because somebody tells them. They have their vaccinations. Some vaccinations are needed for healthful pregnancy. They have less weight gain and experience fewer complications. So preconception care is critical, and it's lacking horribly in Texas. So this is the part of the course where we start talking about the physiology of reproduction. And this is going to be a bit of a repeat from what you have learned a while back, probably in anatomy and physiology. But to help advise people about reproduction, we need to understand how it happens. Okay, so this is a review of how it happens. And I often ask this test question on a test, and probably in the form of an essay, so get ready for it. Okay, so here's a diagram just to get you started. This is a uterus, showing you where it is right here. This is a fallopian tube. This right here is the ovary. Once a month during the reproductive years, either this ovary or this ovary will release an egg. This one shows it happening. Release an egg that enters in the fallopian tube. As we'll show you, right after ovulation, this is typically where fertilization occurs. So if sexual intercourse happens, sperm go up here, go up the fallopian tubes, and the fertilization can happen way up here. Okay, so we'll get to that. But anyway, so this is showing you kind of what's happening. So here's the ovary with all the eggs, and girls are born with a finite number of eggs, maybe 500. They don't continue to produce eggs during their lifetime. They're born with their contingent. Males, on the other hand, continually make sperm. So that's a very, very big difference in the genders here. So around the age of 50, she's about out, okay? So that's why the reproduction occurs from the time, capacity occurs from about the time of menstruation up through, a few years before she stops menstruating. So anyway, so that's kind of sets the stage here. So the endometrium is the lining of the uterus, and we're going to talk about this. And so here's the cervix right here, and here's the vagina. And so the cervix is a small narrow opening here. During childbirth, this goes from a little tiny pinpoint to 9 to 10 centimeters to allow a head to emerge. Okay, so this is why childbirth is so much fun. Okay, so this is what the anatomy looks like. So keep these terms in mind, and let's move forward. Here's a blow up, and I mentioned earlier. So here's the fallopian tube. Here's the ovary with a developing ovary. We call them follicles, but they're developing an egg. What happens? The egg or the oocyte is released, and fertilization occurs up here in the fallopian tubes. Okay, so while after that happens, look at this, day 1, day 2, and so on. Day 3 to 4 here, we start the cell division up here in the fallopian tube. So we're developing a solid ball, and then later on we have something that implants like 8 to 9 days after conception. This matters because people taking pregnancy tests cannot tell that this happened. There's no way a pregnancy test can say that this happened, but after implantation happens, and then those pregnancy tests work on a hormone that's produced after that process. So we'll talk about this some more. I'm just trying to get you oriented again. Okay, so the next part of this is talking about the menstrual cycle, and this gets in some detail that requires you to learn some terminology. And this terminology is important. You use it the rest of your life and also as a professional. So the menstrual cycle lasts approximately 28 days. All women are different, but this is an average. And there are 2 phases. One is called the follicular phase, and one is luteal phase. And this terminology will become very clear as we describe the process. So these are probably new terms for you, but we'll define them and show what's going on. And we have a list of major hormones here that run the menstrual cycle. This is also a lot of terminology. In a regular class, you would be writing these terms down from memory. You have a little bit of luck here on your take-home exams, but nonetheless, it's very important to be able to learn this language because it helps you think about reproductive health and communicate better with people as you serve as their healthcare provider and so on. So here's a list of hormones. I'm not going to describe everything they do here. This list is to show you the name of the hormone and the acronym we use. Acronym is an abbreviation. So gonadotropin releasing hormone, which is something you probably never heard of, is abbreviated GnRH. Follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. Luteinizing hormone, LH. These terms here are going to show up on the next few slides, and they have to do with preparation of the female body for conception. Okay, so keep those in mind. And estrogen, progesterone, you've heard these terms before, but they influence outcomes of pregnancy. So just, this is one of your slides to refer to what does it stand for, and what does it stand for? Okay, so here we go. I've been teaching this for many, many years, and people always understand this if they follow through logically with me. So here we go. First thing that happens in the menstrual cycle is gonadotropic releasing hormone is released. And this is a hormone. Remember, hormone is produced by one cell and influences another cell. So this hormone influences cells in the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so this hormone starts the menstrual cycle and it affects the pituitary, increasing the production of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. This is part of the menstrual cycle. The levels of these matter. So here's an ovary. So take a look at this and we'll talk about how these hormones affect this. Okay, so luteinizing hormone. Oh, let's go with number 2 here. Follicle stimulating hormone, number 2, causes the growth of the follicles. So here's an ovary, and every month, remember I said there are about 500 eggs in a person at birth, so maybe it's 250 here, and I'm making up that number, but you know, it makes sense, 200, 250. So there's a bunch of oocytes or eggs that can mature and be available to be fertilized. And that happens on a monthly basis. Some people can feel this. Some people can feel when they ovulate, they actually feel a pain, a short pain on one side or the other when they ovulate. So it's very interesting. So follicle stimulating hormone stimulates a follicle, which is a component that surrounds each of these eggs. And one of them on one side starts to mature. So the stimulation causes them to change from just sort of a generic egg sitting there to, oh, we're creating a follicle. We're providing extra nutrition for a particular egg. We're putting all, I hate to say this, all of our eggs in one basket here. We've decided that we are going to promote this particular egg in case fertilization happens. So the female body is ready to be fertilized every month for decades. Okay, so every month one of these follicles matures. Okay, so and then luteinizing. So here's what happens after follicle stimulating hormone. It's all growth. We're nurturing a particular egg, and then the luteinizing hormone actually stimulates the rupture of a follicle. So luteinizing hormone. This follicle ruptures, and that's a release of the egg, and that's the egg that can get fertilized on this particular menstrual cycle. Okay, so these follicle cells will matter when I go forward. So with this discussion, but so what we have here is ovulation. Ovulation is when there is a release of an egg from the ovary. Ovulation is obviously critical for conception. Okay, so now I mentioned the phases. So what we talked about here was the follicular phase. We use that terminology because we're talking about the growth of the follicle. This is a follicle in the ovary. So this growth of the follicle and then ovulation involves a follicle. This is called the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle. This usually occurs from day 1 to day 14. If we're talking about a 28-day cycle, follicles are developing and so forth for those first 14 days. Okay. So the next phase is a luteal phase. So let's go back. After that follicle ruptures, so you have a rupturing right here. Once this rupture happens, the new phase starts. So after the follicle ruptures and the ovum or egg is released, those follicle cells right here, these cells become a mass of cells called the corpus luteum. So those cells in the ovary are still important. Even though the egg is gone, those cells are ready to support a pregnancy by changing the hormonal milieu of the body. They produce estrogen and progesterone. What do? The estrogen stimulates the growth of the endometrium. That's the lining of the uterus. So the uterine lining is there, and then in preparation for pregnancy, it gets thicker and produces an increased lining, just in case implantation occurs. And the progesterone causes that endometrium to thicken, and also people may feel breast engorgement. So these are changes in hormones, okay, that can affect the whole cycle, but the symptoms women are going to feel is here. So during the latter part of the menstrual cycle, women experience a thickening of the endometrium, so the uterus is thicker and their breast may be engorged. So the body is saying, hey, now is this time to have a baby or not? We're going to have implantation or not. So we get everything ready for this to happen. Now, if no fertilization occurs, look at this slide here. See this part right here? The next slide, I'm just taking off in this so you can see I graded out here. So if no fertilization occurs, hormone levels go down. That corpus luteum, which is comes from the follicle in the ovary, breaks down, stops producing estrogen and progesterone. And so instead of maintaining the uterine lining, they give it up. So then this initiates a menstrual flow. So every month a woman in normal circumstances, during her reproductive years, her body is ready for conception. And so what we're talking about is the readiness of conception. So in this case, it doesn't happen. So it breaks down, she's got a period, then she starts all over again, month after month after month. Maybe starting as early as 9 years for some people and ending as late as 52 years for some people, and sometimes shorter. It's a long time to be reproductive. What about if fertilization does occur? If it does occur, we've talked about this. So here's the sperm, here's the ovary. Remember, the egg is released because of luteinizing hormone. And here it is moving up the fallopian tube. And the sperm is also moving into the fallopian tube from the opposite direction. So if fertilization does occur, it happens here in the follicle, in the fallopian tube. And then the conceptus moves its way down to the lining of the ovary, uterus, I'm tired. Line of the uterus moves its way down and then implants. So we can see a blow up here. So here is the zygote. It's got 1 cell, then it's got 4 cells, and it's replicated, and it comes here, just a solid ball of cells, and then it implants. So here's what we have here. This is called the embryo. The first 2 weeks after conception, this is an embryo, and it implants into the uterus. This is where this thick endometrial lining can help. So implants here, there's lots of nutrition here to provide food and also develop the organ structure of the placenta. So that's what happens. So this is if fertilization does occur. Here's implantation, and this is kind of important because as it implants, it's now called a zygote, and it produces a hormone. You need to put a star by this and make sure you record this. It produces a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin. So this hormone produced by cells from here changes the maternal response. So instead of everything breaking down and a period happening, instead of that solid ball of follicular cells called the corpus luteum is maintained, and then it keeps producing estrogen and progesterone. So we've had a change here. Instead of letting everything fall apart, we maintain the hormone producers of the ovary. This keeps the uterine lining rich, and there's no menstrual flow. So what a woman notices is, wait, my period's late, right? So if people are standard on a period every 28 days or 30 days or whatever's normal for them, they're a couple days late, And sometimes there's other reasons for this, but we start to think, wow, I wonder if conception occurred. All right, and so you'll find out, but this hormone right here, human chorionic gonadotropin, that's the hormone that we actually use to test for pregnancy on the pregnancy sticks. You know, when people buy those pregnancy kits and then they provide urine and put it on the stick, what they're doing is they're testing for this hormone. This hormone really doesn't occur in the human body unless implantation occurs. But notice this was 8 to 9 days after intercourse. So intercourse can result in a pregnancy, but you're not going to find out for over a week. And some of the tests are good, some are not that good, so they may take a little bit longer. But so that's the whole story of that. So this is something I won't ask you about, but sometimes when I'm thinking, this is from the book, I like to look at these graphs that show what happens when. So this is day 14. This is, if you look at the ovary, remember we have the follicular phase, right? So the follicle and the ovary is getting bigger and more mature. And then luteinizing hormone says, okay, ovulate. So here's luteinizing hormone. So we ovulate, the egg comes out, and then the follicle becomes the corpus luteum. That's a luteal phase. So looking at these diagrams kind of helps you get your language down. Follicular phase is right after the menstrual cycle is over. Here's day 14, and then we have a luteal phase. So this shows you where the hormones are, and this shows you the thickness of the lining of the uterus, right? So that's just helpful to think things through. So this is about the hormone test, or the pregnancy test. We're looking for human chorionic gonadotropin. We like to ask on the exam where this comes from. So we covered that a couple slides ago, so remember that. This is detected after 6 to 8 days after intercourse. And it can be negative and then become positive. Okay, so people often check and check and check, and then the status changes. But you don't get a false positive very often. So if it's negative, you go, well, I may not have caught it. But if it's positive, that generally means conception happened. The levels of this hormone double every 2 to 3 days. And so when people go get wellness care, they measure their HCG levels to see, is the pregnancy progressing? How's it going? So this is one of the levels they'll be measured during care. Now, an interesting thing, follicle stimulating hormone. Remember, that's the hormone that causes the follicle and the ovary to ovulate. Levels of this go up as women age, and there may be some health ramifications of it. I'm not going to ask you this, I just thought I'd throw it out there in case you care. So this part I do ask about. Okay, how is the pregnancy test conducted? What is the basis of the pregnancy test? And so on. Okay, so all those slides on women, now our slides are all about men, and there's one. And it's not because they're less important, it's just because when we look at the care of the pregnancy and so forth, it's about the female body. So male reproductive system has the same hormone except for testosterone. And I will not ask you what these hormones do on your exam, but I want you to know that they're there. So they have slightly different functions because it's a male, but they have similar hormones that do different things. And they're responsible for production and release of sperm. Okay. We get into health aspects of pregnancy, and one thing is looking at infertility and subfertility. So let's look at these terms. Infertility is the inability to get pregnant after 12 or more months of regular and protected sexual intercourse. It's a definition, right? They give you 12 months. And this affects, sadly, a large number of individuals, 10 to 15%. Subfertility is a period of reduced fertility when conception is desired. So people just aren't fertile like they want to be, but it's not the same thing as infertility. So there's several conditions that affect fertility, and many of these have to do with nutritional status and health behaviors. Some things we can't do anything about, like age, but it's important to take a look at all these things that affect fertility. So let's look at age first. And you probably know some of this, but for women, fertility decreases sharply at around age 35. So this is showing you how much the ovarian reserve is the number of eggs available. And I told you we had a certain amount, like 500, and then that amount goes down through life. Okay, we're talking menstruation here and so forth. But around age 35, fertility decreases. There are still eggs left, but it's more difficult to conceive, and that there's an increased risk for Down syndrome, which I'm sure you know. For men, fertility declines every year. Sperm quality declines with age, and age may contribute to the risk for some Down syndrome for men too. So it's not just the woman being this age, it's also the age of the male. Children, older men also have a higher risk for schizophrenia. Okay, the second condition that affects reproduction and fertility is something that sometimes I find, I'm so glad I talk about this, because in my classes, there are often students that have never heard of it before, and they may have it. And there's some people that have experienced it. So I want to make sure you have an understanding of what's going on. There's a term called, or a condition called endometriosis. And what this is occurs when there are bits of endometrial tissue. Remember, this is an endometrium here, grow on organs in the body cavity, not just here. So in a normal menstrual cycle, you get a thickening of the endometrium and then the cells will go out. But some people, these cells that produce the menstrual blood sometimes go back up the fallopian tube, out into the body cavity. They can often attach to the fallopian tubes on the outside here, or to where the ovary connects, even other parts of the body. So these are endometrial cells that are in the wrong place. And this is not too uncommon. 5 to 10% of women are affected. Okay, so what happens is during the menstrual cycle, when you have those hormonal changes, these cells of the endometrium act like they're part of the uterine lining and produce blood. Like they thicken and increase the secretion. So they thicken up just like they're getting ready for a menstrual cycle, right? Ready for conception and for implantation, or for implantation. They thicken up. And so if you think about this month after month after month after month and year after year, if women have this condition, there's a lot of mess that can happen on the inside of the body here, where these endometrial tissues are producing uterine cells, right? Cells are lining the uterus. So how they typically, you can tell in ultrasound. Now I looked this up last time. The diagnosis is typically done by laparoscopy. And what they do is they have a scope that they, so they take her, put her out, or sedate her somehow, pump gas into her abdomen, some CO2 or something like that, to make sure it's bloated so they can see. And then they look at the uterus and the tissues in here to see if we have any of those endometrial cells, okay? So they look and they can see them. And I have a video posted for you to take a look at this. It's really fun to look at. You should do that. It's a short video and it shows you someone doing a laparoscopy and identifying these tissues. So if those are there, then that's how it can be diagnosed. People that have endometriosis can experience pain. They may experience pain in the abdomen, pain during the menstrual cycle, and the impact is decreased fertility, which is not completely understood. Although some of these cells, this endometrial cells, may, as they migrate through the fallopian tube, stay in here and end up causing blockages. So some people are infertile because there's some blockages in their fallopian tubes. Okay, so that's one of the things. So what do you do about it? We can get it tested, and there's actually lots of things people can do. Some radiologists actually can take inject a fluid up through this area and follow it up the fallopian tube and see if there's a blockage. Right, so you can take a look at it and see what's going on. But of course, this requires medical care. Okay. Third issue has to do with body weight, and we'll talk about overweight and underweight. So overweight, women who are overweight increase for irregular periods, elevated insulin, reduced ovulation, and something called polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I'm going to talk about, which affects their fertility. And women who are overweight have an increased risk for having to have a surgical delivery as opposed to a natural delivery, and the babies are large. They also may experience challenges with breastfeeding. So the goal for overweight women, and this is where you would come in, and treatment and prevention, is to help them lose 5 to 10% of weight, and that may restore ovulation and restore fertility. For men, overweight men may have less testosterone, the quality of the sperm may be declined, and where the hope lies is improving lifestyle, because that can improve the quality of the sperm. Okay, so I know that I have covered a lot of material here.